What is up, the Backlog Brawler fans? Here we're watching a video about Age of Empires 2 triggers. So I'm gonna teach you how to create and change the settings of certain triggers. I'll tell you what they're for, each and every bit that you can see there. This is gonna be a series of videos, so I'm gonna start with the basics first. We'll cover conditions and effects at a later date, but without further ado, let's just get to it. So first, load up your editor and you can create your own scenario, but I do have a scenario prepared for you guys here, so we can load that in order to demonstrate how triggers work. And today's special guest is Lahir, who is my favorite hero because he always wants to kill something.
Lahir wishes to kill something.
Okay, so first of all is when you do have your scenario, you have zero triggers, none, because triggers, what are triggers anyway? They are special, so they're sort of like scripts in a way, but not, they're really triggers. What more can I say? They are something that you create in order to trigger an effect, but basically triggers can contain conditions and effects. So before you can create a condition or an effect, you have to have a trigger first. So if you can see, if I press new condition or new effect here, it doesn't do anything. So you have to have a trigger first to associate that condition or effect. So let's just go ahead and create one. So once you create a trigger, it's going to have a trigger name. By default, it's trigger 0, and then there's certain stuff here that I will explain. Anyway, first things first, you can change your trigger name to anything. I mean, really, anything at all, whatever your name is, just so you can remember what that trigger is for. So first off, let's try to create a trigger that kills this guy, because Lahir likes to kill something. So what you have to do is first create your trigger, and then you have to create a condition and an effect. Well, we know what the effect is, right? We want this guy dead. So you can create a new effect, and then it will bring up an effects list down here. And then there are really lots of effects, and watch out for my other videos which will be discussing each and every one of those effects. But for now, it's going to be triggers. But anyway, we'll take something very obvious on what it does: kill object. So let's select that effect, and right off the bat, it gives a lot of confusing drop downs here. But really, for the purposes of this video, I'll just tell you that if you press this set objects button, and click this unit, it basically tells the editor that this kill object effect, you want it to be implemented on this particular unit. So if you want to do that, let's test that out.
Lahir wishes to kill something.
And see, unit dead, I won, Lahir's happy. But why? So why did it die? First of all, that we're gonna explain trigger starting state. So the trigger starting state is currently set to on for this particular trigger, which is anything at all, which I want to change right now so that we can track what it does. So let's say kill red guy. So that's the name of the trigger, kill red guy. Since the starting state is on at the very start of the game, this means this trigger is active and it will kill the object. Now let's see what happens if I put this to off, and let's test the scenario. See, guy is alive, Lahir not happy. So let's quit that. Alright, so as you can see, that's what this on-off state does. That's going to be useful for some scenarios or some things that you may want to do in the future, but we'll be discussing that. Let's stick to the basics first. So I'll just put this to on for now. And then the next field that we'll be discussing is trigger looping. So what is trigger looping? So trigger looping is basically, do you want to keep triggering said effect or said trigger? So if you set that to yes, every second that passes in the game, whatever the effects listed here, as long as it meets the conditions, it will trigger. So let us demonstrate that. Let's change the effect that we have here. What we'll do is, let's do, I'm trying to find the right effect. Where was that? How about change object HP? Okay, so as the name suggests, it changes the object's HP. So I'm going to once again click this set objects button. So I've set this champion to be the object of the change object HP effect. And I'm going to change the operation to subtract. So there's a quantity field here which you can manipulate. So let's say 5. Let's put 5 here. So what this means is that this object, you will subtract its HP by 5 for every time that the trigger triggers. So let's put the trigger looping to no first, and let's see what happens. Okay, basically nothing happened. I don't know why. That's odd. So change object HP, it did not subtract it by 5 for some reason. Let's go to trigger looping. Oh, I see. So there you have it. Guy dead, Lahir happy. So what happened there? What basically happened is that the actual total HP of a champion, this is a champion unit by the way, let's just click this and select this unit. Okay, select the unit, select, is 70. So when we did a trigger, it said subtract 5, so it did that once. So since the HP is 70, again, if you do another test, let's make sure that the trigger looping is set to no. From 70 it becomes 65. And as you can see, when we do the trigger looping yes and do a test, that's when total HP, of course, as well as current HP, reduces by 5 every second. By the way, this is in-game seconds. So yep, Lahir happy with trigger looping. Great, so now we understand that. How about trigger description? So what this does is basically wait, let me see if yeah, that's fine. As long as we don't have trigger looping, red guy won't die. So I can show you what actually happens with trigger description. So trigger description is basically this. Let's just type trigger description for the trigger description so that we know that it's what it is. And for the short description, which I will discuss simultaneously, let's put in short description, or let's say for it to be more personal, I am a short description, and here is I am a trigger description. And then first, let's test without changing these fields. All right, so let's go test. As you can see, nothing seems to be happening. I mean, what happened, right? Blank, nothing interesting is happening, but that's because this field, you can set this to yes, and set this to yes. And it sort of does something that you're very familiar with. Okay, did you see that? On this upper right portion, it says objectives. I am a short description. And if you click the objectives button, I am a trigger description. So that's what they do. They put those things there. Okay, going back. So now we know what they do, right? One very interesting thing is if you put a plus sign on the front of the trigger description, and as well as the short description, actually, it's a plus sign with a space. Let's do another test. Look at that. There's this teeny check mark, which I think you can see with most of the scenarios. So it just adds that, you know, great tick box. Some aesthetics for you there. But let's just say we make another trigger, and I name this kill here, and then let's put another one, trigger Lahir. You don't want to trigger Lahir, but yeah, short description Lahir. Okay, let's put that both to yes, and then see what happens. Oh yeah, by the way, notice I don't have any conditioners or effects. I just put trigger descriptions there. So as you can see, the game still marked it as complete. Oh yeah. That's what happens. So even if I didn't set a condition or an effect, the description of the trigger is still being taken by the game. Another point. So let's do something else. Let's go to kill the red guy here. But let's put what we call a condition. So let's create a new condition. So what a condition does is basically it triggers, it forces the trigger to only activate the effect if it meets the condition. So for example, let's go with something simple, object selected. Let's set the object to, I don't know, maybe this relic here. Okay, so what this says is if I select the relic, this will happen. Alright, so let's test that out. Alright, so first thing you'd notice is that the first short description I wrote isn't checked anymore. And if we check that here, yeah, it isn't checked. Why is that? Because I haven't clicked the relic yet. Clicking the relic, I set it as a condition to trigger the effect. So let's check out the champion's HP. It is 70. If I click this relic here, see, first of all, it recognized that the condition has been met because I selected a relic. So it completed the objective both from here and from here in the short description, and it also reduced the champion's HP from 70 to 65, which is what I set. Okay, so far so good. So now we're gonna discuss the make header tick box. So there are actually 3 things that happen when you do this tick box. So what we'll do is we'll do it for both triggers that I have. I'm just gonna set display on screen no, just for kicks. And so let's test this out. And I want to point out those three things. First is, if you notice, the font's bigger. Second, well, you miss the checkbox now. There's no checkbox, if you can see. And third is, if we do trigger the trigger condition, it still doesn't cross out the entry. So previously, when I click the relic, one of these gets a strike through. But if you make it as a header, that won't happen. Unfortunately, headers, you lose that nice aesthetic check mark. And you know, just so you can see the difference between the font sizes, I'll untick make a header here, and I'll just set this back to yes. See, this one, this big one, is a header, and as you can see, there is an absence of the checkbox. It's also bigger if you view it in the objectives, and if I tick this one, this completed header, you know this is a completed header because it's in green, but this one, it's in green and with a strike through. So if you have a header, there will be no strike through. Basically, that's it. Okay, moving on to description order. So description order is pretty simple. It just takes you to, it just enables you to describe, or rather to change the order in which they appear on the screen. So if, for example, so we have this first one, and we set the red guy description to, let's say, a higher number, let's say 5, it doesn't really matter, and then this is 0. We'll see how that arranges the description. Okay, so IMA trigger description was first, trigger lahir was second. So let's change that and let's make this 10. So this time the lahir description should be has a higher value. It should appear first. See? It is now on the top because it has a higher priority. So it doesn't matter what number you set, as long as it's a higher number, it's gonna be prioritized. Okay, and finally we have string table ID. So what exactly is string table ID? Some complicated programming stuff, but not really. So what this just does is, let's take a number. Let's put in a random number. Let's say 1. Did you notice that the text changed? Wave 1. Let's choose another number, maybe what, 5? Okay, 5 didn't do anything. How about 2? See, it changed to wave 2. So what this does is, there is a file on your Age of Empires installation where there is a definition of what text or what the ID of a certain text is. So for example, if I type in number 2, the string table ID 2 is associated with the text wave 2. Now let's go to the file so that I can show you what I mean. Alright, so here we are at the file, and notice that the examples I used, wave 1 and wave 2, this is the mapping here. So when I type string ID 1 and the first value is the ID, this is the text it will display. So as you would follow, then if I enter the following IDs, it would of course display the associated text with it. For example, here's an ID 4769. Let's go back to our editor and let's type 4769, and as you can see, the description changed according to what you typed here. Now why is there a mechanism like this? It's primarily because when you do your scenarios, you may want to, for example, make it available in certain languages, multiple languages. So what you do is you maintain multiple localization files, and you put their IDs there. So for example, if you, let's say, in that localization file you put in 1, and then the English version would be wave 1. Perhaps in another language, wave, you can translate wave into whatever wave is in another language. And then you can also assign the same string ID, so that when a player plays in their language, the trigger would automatically pick up the right string, the right text, or the description. So that's basically how it works. But otherwise, if you're not really interested in doing multi-language, then you can just leave it at 0 or something, and just put in whatever you want to put there, right? So that's it for string table. And last checkbox here is the mute objectives. So mute objectives is self-explanatory. So if you meet the objective, then you just don't hear a sound. So we know that from our tests, every time the objective has been completed, we hear a sound, right? So see, objectives have changed, the trigger has been triggered, the objective has been completed, but we didn't hear the victory trumpets. That's how it works. So finally, the very last piece of information for triggers, and this is very important, is trigger order. And this also applies to conditions and effects, I believe, but this most especially is important for triggers. Why? I will show you with a demonstration. It's Lahir versus Mr. Champion Red Guy.
Wishes to kill something.
What we're gonna do is we're gonna, well, let's remove the condition first. Right. Here we have, let's change this to damage, oh no, not damage, kill object, because this is gonna be a standoff, right? So kill red guy. Let's set the object to Mr. Red Guy here, and then kill Lahir. Let us do a new effect. Use the same effect, kill object, but this time Lahir is gonna die if this triggers. And then additionally we're gonna put something else, but let me just show you why we need that by just running a test on this one. Okay, they both died regardless of what the order is. That's because both of them have the trigger starting state on, so they automatically get triggered at the beginning. So how do we know which of these triggers actually trigger first? Well, the simple solution is, let's just create a new effect. This effect is going to be deactivate trigger. So for this kill red guy trigger, if this triggers, it's going to deactivate the kill Lahir trigger. And we're gonna do the opposite for kill Lahir. We're gonna do a new effect, choose deactivate trigger, and then this will deactivate the kill red guy trigger. So again, to recap, if this goes first, it will kill the red guy, and it will deactivate the Lahir trigger, which means Lahir won't get killed. But if the kill Lahir trigger goes first, it will kill Lahir, and you can go to objects here, see, it's Lahir that's set as the object, and it will deactivate the trigger for killing the red guy, which means only Lahir dies. So let's test this out. Alright, so who died? It's the red guy. So let's go back to our triggers. What does that mean for us? So that means since the red guy died, it was this trigger that went first. Which is pretty expected because 1, it's the first trigger that we created, and 2, it's the first trigger on this panel. But let's see what happens if we put this kill red guy trigger as the second trigger. You would think that Lahir would die because it's the first trigger, but let's see if that's true. And no. Because Lahir is invincible and he's not affected by triggers. But kidding aside, as you can see, it doesn't matter whether Lahir or red guy trigger went first in this panel. What does matter is their ID, their trigger ID. Now what's a trigger ID? And I should have discussed this first, but nah, it's more interesting if I discuss this last. So when you do new, there you have the ID. It's trigger number 2. So that means, remember the first trigger we did was trigger 0, the next is trigger 1, and then it's trigger 2. So you can just keep creating triggers like that and they'll produce the IDs automatically. So that means you do have to keep track which of those triggers you actually created first. Now, if you are planning on creating a scenario with conflicting conditions, my advice would be, if you have to change the trigger name, at least give yourself a clue on what the ID is. And you could probably do, for example, let's say if you wanna do a kill outpost trigger, you can maybe put something like 2 there. Or maybe you can put something like 2 on the front and then maybe a dash, or basically whatever suits you, just to remind yourself that this trigger has the ID number 2, and if you have a conflicting trigger out there, then it's gonna go first versus trigger 3 or trigger 4, and it's gonna go after trigger 0 and trigger 1. Now another, and maybe this is the last piece that I'm going to discuss, is even if you have these triggers without anything on them and they're color red, that doesn't matter. You can still run your scenario. It will still work. In fact, you can use that to your advantage because they're in red, right? So if you want to maybe create sections in your trigger panel, then you can do that. For example, you can maybe rename this. You can, for example, say killing triggers, and then you move that here. So you know that this section, these triggers, are triggers for killing. And for example, you can maybe name this trigger number 4 as creation triggers, for example. So you can create new triggers down there and create, for example, new effects. Like you could create an object, for example, create a donkey right about here. So if you test that out, see, donkey created, red guy dead, Lahir happy. And basically that's it for triggers. I hope you learned a lot, and tell me in the comment section if you have any confusions about the features, conditions, and effects we will be discussing on the next video, so watch out for that. Till then, see you next time.